So everyone, welcome. Thank you for everyone that's in the chat right now. This is David McDermott, our friend here. IT's got the tools, RM makes the rules with his session. If we go to the next slide, David is a records management consultant. You may know him as the past president as well as chairman of ARMA International and the Institute of Certified Records Managers. He's written and edited privacy law and provided testimony on electronic discovery. I will reiterate again, I will be watching the chat, both in the Zoom panel, which I prefer you don't use, but I see everyone is so active right here on the InfoCon panel. I appreciate it. Hello to all of you. If you have questions, please do ask them in the chat and I will interject, jump in, interrupt Dave, and ask on the fly here so we can actually derail him a little bit as opposed to him going on and us waiting till the end to actually do all the Q&A. So please do ask your questions of him, challenge him, just not too much. Remember, he is coming off of surgery. But with that, welcome everyone. And I'm going to hand this off to you, David. Thank you.
Well, thank you, David. And thanks for having me, everybody. It's an honor to present again to the ARMA International Conference attendees. I wish it was live as opposed to virtual, but those are the cards we've been dealt. I'm going to add a little bit to my background. I've actually been in this world for 40 plus years, believe it or not. My schooling was in marketing. And one day my ex-father-in-law called me up and said, hey, there's a job in records management. We think you might want it. That was over 40 years ago. Started out as a microfilm quality check guy. And I tell you what, I've been in this business ever since. I've seen the world change to where we're at today, and I continue to look forward to where it's going to go tomorrow. So with that, let's get right into it. I'm going to tee some of this up for the important part of the message in the presentation. And the important part of that presentation is certainly IT has the tools, records management has the rules, but we have to work together to be successful. So let's level set that. As David said, ask questions as we go. But let's start out with teeing this up. Employees tend to do what's easiest and what will work best for them. They will work around every rule that you establish or every policy that you establish because they want to do what is easiest for them to accomplish their jobs. I was pulled over the other day doing 45 and a 35, and the officer said, you're breaking the rules. And I said, I know, I just didn't think I was going to get caught. $80 later, I know better than to break the rules when it comes to driving. We, for the most part, are hoarders, whether that's a physical object, whether that's an informational object. We bend the rules and we add to the information chaos. How many of you, like I, keep all those extra bolts and nuts in your garage knowing that you're going to use them? But when it comes time to use them, you can't find them because you don't know where you've put them. Information is the same issues. So we as records management folks need to understand how we can get our arms around that information to eliminate that chaos. Keeping information can prove to be costly, very expensive during litigation, very expensive during discovery, forensics, that sort of thing. And hopefully you will never have to pay a fine in that process. And finally, change is hard. We as humans don't typically like change. I once implemented a program for a very large conglomerate organization. And I had to float this program up to the CFO, CIO, and general counsel and secretary of the company. And they asked what the hardest part of implementing this program was going to be. And I came back with implementing software is easy. Well, okay, not that easy, but it's easy to a certain extent. However, getting people to change the way they work is the difficult part. Change is hard. We all tend to push back on it. And not only that, oftentimes when IT produces a new application and pushes it to the employees, there's not training involved. I look at Outlook and Exchange, and how many of us continue to use Outlook as a storage method for information even though that's not what Outlook was designed to do, right? So all of this information is building up and building up and building up on us to the point where we cannot manage it. So this is not my statement. This is a friend of mine. We borrowed it. But the reality is the ability to create content is and has outstripped our ability to manage it. Now, what I mean by that, the reality is content is coming at us so quickly that we don't have the tools in place currently to necessarily manage it. Some of you folks in big organizations may be ahead of this game and already implemented artificial intelligence tools, different tools to help you get your control of your information, but many of us haven't. To start with, if you're going to do this and do it correctly, you need to make sure you have sound policy, you have to have rules and processes in place, and you have to have support from upper management. I'm not telling you anything new. I think we've been talking about that same thing for years and years and years. However, my experience, upper management still does not like to spend money to manage content because it's pure overhead. So we have to change their minds. So let's talk about this. The lie of cheap storage. When I testified on the 2006 amended rules of the Federal Civil Procedure, I followed the storage network folks in their testimony. And every person before me that testified that storage was cheap and there's absolutely no reason to get rid of information. I mean, I have an external drive here that's 2 terabytes and I paid $85 for it. So storage is cheap. But what isn't cheap? Well, first off, legal discovery is not cheap. Regulatory actions are not cheap when you have to produce information. And hopefully, if you get into those situations, if you are a litigated organization, you've implemented your policies and processes. And if you have to produce content, you only produce content that is relevant and you have defensibility behind you because you've set the right policies, processes, and procedures in place. Then, of course, we get the digital smoking guns. My experience has been, if I find something, I don't find something that is going to go against us in a system. Those general ledger systems, those PeopleSoft systems, those type of things. Where I find the smoking guns is in the unstructured content that our employees create on the fly, both in Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, and certainly email is a very huge smoking gun. Those are what I would call the breadcrumbs to get to the information. The reality is we can manage that content in a way that will make us defensible, but it's going to take tools to do it. So let's talk about storage is cheap for a second. What's not cheap is the cost of managing that storage, and we'll get to that here in a second. So let's talk about rules. IT and RM have to get in the sandbox and work together. I use the term sandbox. I use the term bus. We've got to get the people together to work together. The one thing I always warn people when you're doing that is you have to remember the number one rule we learned in kindergarten. When you're in the sandbox together, you do not throw sand. That's when the battles begin, and that's when nothing gets done. So we need to work together. Who should we put in that sandbox to get this project or this program of content classification and cleanup approved and successful? I always like to get IT. I like to get the CIO. I like to get the CTO to understand what it is that we're trying to accomplish. What we're trying to accomplish is getting rid of all of this old content that has no position or no place in our organizations anymore. We want to manage that content.
So David, here, I'm going to interrupt you a little bit here because there's some great conversation that's going on. I wish it was posed more in the form of a question, but that's fine. I do want to interject. We're talking about, systems, processes. We're talking organization with a technology and information risk management team within the enterprise risks division, sort of finding this balance between, and again, people in the comments, I apologize. If you want to clarify how I can ask this or clarify some of these points, please do. But you have this idea that records managers need to provide sort of the training, the input to direct some good behaviors to meet this compliance and regulatory systems that organizations have in place, that they need to get on their soapboxes and talk to the employees about that. But I think there's some friction there as far as that is part of it, but it's also relying on the systems in place so that your knowledge workers don't have to rely on it, that they don't have to be records managers. And yeah, and again, I apologize if I'm not expressing this as eloquently, but
David, that's a great question, a great comment. Our job is to not make employees records managers. Our job is to implement processes that our employees do not have to worry about going in and going, oh my gosh, what do I tag this record as? Oh, look at this big retention schedule. There's 200 categories. I think it goes here, but I'm not sure. That's where your tools come into place, your artificial intelligence tools, your systems you set up. We want to create an environment where technology manages the content so the employees can manage their jobs. We need to get there, and we're not there yet. I've done projects where we go in and ask an employee or a department to go in and clean up their content manually, and they hate us for it because we're hoarders. We keep content because it is very difficult to go back in a manual process to clean that content up. Whereas if you implement an artificial intelligence tool such as Shiny.Cognitive or Active Navigation or Stored IQ or many others, it removes the employee out of that process of determining how they should manage their content. We're doing that for them, working as business partners with IT, records management, legal, and quite honestly, the business. We need their input. We need those folks to be in the sandbox with us as we develop these processes and tools to help them manage their content in a better way. Well, let's rephrase that, to help them not have to manage their content, because we're going to do it for them using the tools that we have. I hope that makes the question and where they're trying to get to.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So the other thing I'd like to talk about real quick is the cost of storage. We sit here, back to the other slide, storage is not cheap. In fact, if you go to your IT folks, and this is why that you need them in the sandbox with you or on the bus with you. If you go to them and ask them what it takes to manage content, you will find that most organizations will tell you it takes $10 to $20 a gigabyte per year to manage that information through backup processes and different processes that your IT group may have. Okay, so a gig of storage, 20 bucks a month or 20 bucks a year, that's no big deal. Remember, you're trying to build your case to get your program in place, not as a one and done, but an ongoing program. If you're a large organization and you're running 1,000 terabytes or a petabyte and beyond, if you start using the math, a terabyte of content can cost you 20 grand a year to manage. And if you throw that as a terabyte, all of a sudden, if you have, for argument's sake, 800 terabyte of content, that costs you around $16 million a year to manage. Now, keep in mind, every organization is going to be different. Don't use my numbers, get your own numbers, do your own time motion studies, get with your IT folks, get them in the sandbox, get them to buy in to managing content better, other than, I'm sure most of you have seen it in the, what I'm going to say is the old days. My dad used, I always ask my dad, hey dad, in the olden days, but the reality is, in the old days, IT used to send out messages. Hey, we've run out of storage space. Delete what you don't need, without any consequences of what you may be deleting, not following your organization's policies and rules. So we need to help IT with the rules. IT needs to help us with the tools, because they're the ones that are going to be pushing the buttons.
So I'll push back a little bit on that. We have Denise here in the chat talking about, we're asking, how do you suggest we collaborate with the architects in IT? And rather than dictate a rule and have them push back and simply say, no, that's way too difficult, we're descoping these requirements, or whatever excuse that they make, right? How do we get them to come on board and sort of collaborate with us, get in the sandbox?
Yeah, I think somebody's probably reading my presentation going ahead of me at the moment, but you have to develop a marketing communication plan. You've got to present your position in a way that is not threatening, in a way that we are partners. You know, when you think about information governance and you think about the 3 pillars of information governance, they're all separate but distinct pillars. But in order for us to hold up that roof, we all need to work together. We each bleed into the different areas of those pillars, whether it's security, privacy, IT, and management. The reality is, when you create a retention policy and you create a retention schedule that is driven by the policy and legal has approved it, then what you need to do is get together to try to figure out how you're going to implement that policy without being, what word do I want to use here? Without being threatening, without being aggressive. I always tell people, leave your baggage at the door. We need to work this together. We're all in this together. We're not like Washington, where we got 2 aisles that were fighting against each other, trying to get one thing accomplished. We need to be able to compromise. We need to be able to change rules if we need to. And we'll talk about that in the next few slides. But it's all in how you market and how you position the value of what it is that you're trying to accomplish as you try to clean up your data. And I quite honestly don't like the term data, because I really go to more of an unstructured document type, where it's physical objects, even though retained electronically. So, but I hope that answers the question.
Well, and Dave, I know you're going to answer some of these too. I will throw them out to you if you want to address them at the appropriate slide, or you want to get to them. How do you deal with IT that wants to retain control and won't share? And I think you have expressed a little bit of that about getting into the sandbox. And is AI the only way to get technology to manage content for you? Are there other technologies that we can use? And I know you addressed that later on, but yeah, some of this. Okay, guys. Oh, wow.
I love this kind of interaction with folks. AI certainly is not the end all be all, because you have to train AI to do it for you. But if you're going to try to do it manually, or you're going to try to use different tools, nothing is magic. You have to train it. You have to educate it. You have to tell it what you're looking for. So there's that training curve, if you will, on trying to get AI to do it for you. I've used, like I said, active navigation. I've used cognitive. I've used others. What I find is you actually have as many not statements as you do accurate statements. So like accounts payable, you might have a statement that says accounts payable, but then you might have 10 that say not training, not this, not that, not this. I don't believe, and I can get battle back and I'm fine with that. When you're an organization with petabyte or hundreds of terabyte of content, You need AI to help you. And I'll give you an example. I'm in a huge project right now with one of my clients. And certainly I cannot tell you the volume of records they have, but I spent 45 minutes doing some filtering using what I refer to as words to codes based off the schedule, based off the policy, based off the functional area that I was working with. I was able to classify over 500,000 files in less than 45 minutes. Without those kind of tools to help you, you're not going to be successful. My opinion, this is my opinion based off of working in the trenches, trying to get this content cleaned up so we can have a better footprint of information going forward. I hope that answered the question. This is the kind of presentation that I'd love to have go for more than 45 minutes or an hour, because there's a lot of detail under the covers, so to speak, on how you're going to be successful. David, did that answer the question? I hope.
Yeah, you know what? And honestly, everybody on the chat is being so nice and like awesome. They're throwing a lot of questions out there, and I appreciate that you're answering as best as you can. And it's coming off in a slew here, so I only apologize if we can't get to everyone. The other one too, and again, I'm throwing it out to you. If you want to get to it at the slide, you can, or you can address it now. One of our biggest challenges is migrating data from file shares to SharePoint. I love this question. Best practices to offer. Our internal IT believes we can build tools internally to migrate. My largest challenge is to clean up what gets moved. At the moment, looking to do this manually. Does this sound practical? I am just sitting on my hands because I so want to come in with a big shiny doc sort of solution. And I know you have a whole host of tools that you actually rely on, but this is such a fastball down the middle here. So I have to ask.
Yeah, no, I've worked with organizations as a practitioner that decided they could write their own applications, and they turned out to be nightmares. I'm not saying that other organizations have the same issues. I worked for an organization once that was building applications, and I used to always joke that if our cowboys got laptops, I was done. And they finally got laptops, and I still have the photo of this. There's a horse looking over the shoulder of this cowboy, and I always joke that the horse was the help desk guy. So the reality is, it's a cultural thing. It's how you present it to management if you can get buy off on moving forward with your program. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit, David. I'm not a big fan, quite honestly, of building applications internally unless we can get together, not to beat this to death, but get our IT, our developers in a sandbox so we can all understand what it is that our end goal needs to be. I'm a shooter. I used to be on a pistol team, and I'm a golfer, not a very good one. I'll never forget working with my golf pro to try to get my slice out of my drive. And he asked me where I was aiming, and I said, out there. I just want to get it out in the middle. And his comment was, if you don't have a target, you don't have anything to aim for. And that really stuck with me. We have to have a target, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But without that target, you have nothing to aim for. You have nothing to present to upper management to get support if you don't come together and create what it is that you want that target to be at the end of the day. Remember this, we kind of touched on this a little bit about being flexible. You need to be somewhat flexible with your rules. I don't know any retention schedule that is set in concrete. I don't know any policy or rule that is set in concrete. They're always adjustable, especially if you think about how citations change, how things are going on in our world with privacy and security. We need to be flexible as well. It's just not forcing employees to do something. We need to be able to change our minds and work together as well. I've seen all too often where a records manager, a certified records manager, a CIP, or an IGP come in and they slam their hands down on the desk and say, no, you will do it this way. Well, think about it. When you're kids, when your parents said, I don't want you playing with those kids anymore, that just makes us want to play with them more. So we need to be flexible and we need to be adaptable. Easier said than done, but if you leave with anything today, leave with being more flexible, because it takes all of us to be successful as we try to develop this classification and data cleanup process. So, and again, I apologize for looking at notes. Honest, I did not take any pain pills today, so at least I'm somewhat here. So let's look at let's continue. David, any other questions real quick?
No, please do go on. Thank you.
So the reality is, and we touched on this earlier, this is beyond manual scope. We do not have time as employees to go in and clean up, in theory, what could be 20, 30 years of content that we've stored. We may have created spreadsheets that we thought were really cool and work in process stuff, and then we don't use them anymore and we just save them out to our network share or SharePoint site or home drive or hard drive or even your desktop. We don't have time in today's environment to do manual processes. Some of us do, and it depends on the size of the company, right? The reality is large-scale cleanup and classification projects need technology. Without technology, in my opinion, you will continue to not move the chains down the field. You'll never get that third down and first, whatever. You have to have technology. But, and I touched on this a little bit ago, technology is not magic. You can't rub a lamp and poof, out pops the magic genie to clean your content up for you. You need to be able to automate, and you need to be able to automate in a fashion that will allow you to be ongoing. Whatever that ongoing cadence is, you need to be able to work with IT to get that in place, including your legal department, to make sure whatever you're doing is defensible. And whatever you're doing is you're not deleting content that may be on a litigation hold or a regulatory action. We have to work together. I've done cleanup projects using content tools where we have found orphaned content from employees that have been gone for 20 years. I have found the series of Game of Thrones on people's computers. I have found divorce decrees. I have found football games. I have found the same baby pictures in 8 different repositories because somebody sent them to somebody who sent them to somebody who sent them to somebody. We have to create the rules and the processes to get that content cleaned up. This is beyond manual processes. Now, there are companies out there that will do it manually, but how long do you want it to take? How long do you continue down the same processes you have while the content is exponentially growing into a pile, as one of my clients says, a pile of poo? You have to start somewhere. So with that, let's talk about dark data. In my world, I think it's all dark anymore. The content I've found doing these cleanups, as I mentioned just a second ago, is quite eye-opening. And I believe, quite honestly, the bigger the information footprint and the business you're in, the larger footprint you have, that leaves you more open to ransom attacks and privacy fines, all those things that we're hearing about in today's world. When you look at like the GDPR and the EU, there are tremendous fines occurring because people don't know what content is sitting in their systems. We need to know what it is that we don't know. And without support of IT and tools, whatever tools IT chooses, we need to be on board with them and help them. I look at some of the latest cyber attacks this year, the Colonial Pipeline, JBS meat processing, and many others. And if you really want to open your eyes, go out and do some Google searches on the amount of cyber attacks that have occurred in 2021 that we have never even heard about because they were so small. But whenever you get a cyber attack and you have to pay money or ransom, it's just money we don't need to be spending if we manage our content correctly. Doesn't mean that you're not going to get a cyber attack. Doesn't mean that you're not going to get fined. It just means that we have a better understanding of what our content footprint looks like, and we know it's out there. The other thing I wanted to quickly mention is the ever-shifting legal citations. I don't know who uses services for their retention schedule. I work with a couple companies where I use Iron Mountain's Policy Center. I use Zazio's Versatile Retention System. And it is amazing to see how many new citations or updated citations or major changes to citations that occur on a monthly basis. We were thrown a challenge where in the past, we created our retention schedules using what I refer to as the minimum retention process. And what I mean by that is when you reviewed your citations, they always recommended a retention period, but we were allowed to set an administrative retention period. So we typically end up over retaining content that we shouldn't really be retaining. However, when GDPR came into place, the California security laws, New York, and other states, we're now dealing with maximum retention periods where we're not allowed to keep content longer than the maximum retention, eliminating our ability to set administrative requirements. Why is this important? Because if you're an organization dealing with privacy and security, you need to make sure that you are up and current on your citations. Otherwise, you may be one of those companies like, Amazon, who has been paid or fined $877 million in the past few years for privacy breaches. I encourage you to stay up on legal citations, and I encourage you to get with your IT people because this is how we can help them be more successful. It takes the village, and we're part of that village. So with that, I'm going to jump to kind of the meat of this presentation. I used to be the main person here. I always believed in a single source of truth. I always wanted to do a lift and shift and move content into a repository. I don't necessarily believe that today with the tools we have. We can manage content in place. We can embed our rules and metadata for retention within folder structures and documents where the user doesn't even know we've done it. So we can manage in place. As I said, I'm shifting how I feel. Lifting and shifting content is expensive, especially if you do it without any regard to what you're lifting and shifting. In other words, you want to do a cleanup before you move content. You want to do a cleanup even if you leave your content in place. How are we going to do that? My projects that I work on, I develop what we've all heard the term ROT, redundant, outdated, and trivial content, or ROT rules. I believe before you do anything, you need to know what it is that you don't know, and you need to go in and you need to clean up that content that has no place on our company's hardware and our networks. None of this, none of the cleanup, none of that should occur until you've developed your processes. Create ROT rules. When I create ROT rules, I create them in 3 different levels. I create a low risk, medium risk, and high risk. Low risk content is stuff that your IT folks should be able to go in, set a cadence, and automatically delete that content without the user even knowing that it's gone. Now, there are things that go in there that certainly need to be put in place before you do that. But those are the things that I do. Create the rules, get them approved by legal, get them approved by IT, so IT knows what they're doing in order to manage content going forward. Remember, they're the ones with the tools. We're just helping them embrace their. So,
Oh, Dave. Oh, sorry. I think you're back again. You were breaking up a little bit as far as audio goes, but you seem fine here. Actually, before you leave that point, we've got a question here. Who owns the content? I mean, who governs the repository where this content exists? Whether you're lifting, shifting, managing in place.
Yeah. Culturally, it may be different by each company. Typically, your IT groups manage the repositories. They own the repositories. They do not take ownership of the information. The creator or the leader of that department owns that information. The company owns that information. So it depends on the organization, quite honestly. I have never seen either a content management system or, quite honestly, managing in place where IT doesn't own those processes.
I love that, though. Richard qualified this. In his experience, everyone has an opinion on ownership, but when you try to assign responsibility for that content, no one suddenly wants to own it.
Yeah. And nobody really wants to help. That's why it's so important to get people in the sandbox. So one of the things that I went to school for marketing. I don't know how the hell I ended up in records management, but I always say, if you can manage, or if you can market records management, you can market anything. So you really need to sit down with your team, those people on the bus, and you need to create a marketing and communication plan. Number one, for cleanup, how you're going to do it. You need to do that communication plan in a way that the garden variety employee is going to understand what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And then be prepared for questions. I'm on call. Oh, hang on a second. You got to take this call. Hello. Yeah. Hello. Yep. No. Yes, we are doing a cleanup. No, we're not deleting all your content. No, you can't name your content with your super secret double handshake naming scheme because we'll find it through text extraction. No, you can't print off all your content and save it in paper. We'll find that. Not a good idea. No, you shouldn't move all your content to an external drive because we'll find that. Oh, you want to copy and paste your content so you can change the dates to the current date. Yeah, we'll find that too. Plus, that's a big legal issue. Please don't do that. Okay, make it a great day. Okay, so I'm not going to get an Oscar for that. I know that. But those are the questions you're going to get when you start down this path of data cleanup, tagging content, making sure you're managing your content. I have had lots and lots of questions that just make you go, but you need to be prepared to answer those. And the thing I'll say is your program and what you're doing, if you're sitting there trying to be perfect, you're never going to be successful. You need to get buy-in, you need to get marketing, you need to get that communication plan. And I'll say this, do not let perfect get in the way of practical. If you do that, you will never be successful. So you just need to be prepared for any question, any comment, and quite honestly, what you may find as you go out and do that discovery. And why are we doing this discovery? Why are we doing all this legwork and background work? We still need to make sure we need to make sure that when we go meet with our executives, we want to be armed with what it is that we're going to be able to save them in the way of resource, expenses, and productivity. Without that knowledge of what you have in your enterprise or your data footprint, information footprint, the chances of you being able to market and getting ongoing approval to continue your program, continue managing electronic content, you may not get it. So be armed with what it costs you to manage a terabyte of content. Be armed with how long it takes your employees to look for and find content. Now, I've seen studies 300 to 400 years, 300 to 400 years, 300 to 400 hours a year. I did a study with one of my other clients years ago. They actually spent about 100 to 150 hours a year looking for content that they could never find. So if you start putting those into numbers, get with your human resource group, find out what the average pay is, including payroll loading. Be prepared and be able to go in and meet with those executives in order to get buy-in for not just a program, but a continuing process to manage your organization's records. So I see we're almost up on time. So one last slide.
Before you go to the last slide, I know I apologize. This was put in the QA panel and I was watching the chat mostly. But I think this is in relation to citations you were talking about. We have a question. Aside from Zazio and IAM Policy Center, are there other tools that you've used or would suggest in that space?
Yeah, there's other tools. I think Access Science has brought up some of them. John Montagna had a tool. John Asaza had a tool. I'm not real familiar with those, but I think Access purchased those. If you don't get a tool, Google. Google is your friend. You can Google terms. You have to try to figure out different terminologies that these lawmakers might promulgate through a citation. I've seen and you have to be able to read and understand. Give you an example. Years ago, I was doing some research for finance, and under Title 26, I came across a citation that said, you must keep this permanent book of record for 3 years. So most people see the term permanent and immediately say, oh, we need to keep it permanent. Make sure you read those citations entirely to understand. But if you, like I said, if you don't buy a service, and you can Google those as well, there's more than the two that I've mentioned. Those are the two I've worked with the most. But Google it and go out and find citations. And especially if you're a litigated organization or a regulated organization that needs to stay up on top of those citations. So I hope that answers the question. I am familiar with Versatile and Iron Mountains Policy Center. Both of them are great tools. I am familiar with Shiny Doc Cognitive for artificial intelligence, active navigation, stored IQ. Those are all tools that I've used in the past. They're all good, but you need to make sure working with your IT that IT agrees with what tool they want to implement. So with that, I'm going to jump to the last. So just to kind of summarize what we're talking about, this really needs to be an ongoing program. You can't go in and do an information data cleanup one time. Remember, content is coming at us exponentially. I started a project once where we had like 300 terabyte, and a year later we had 550. So it is true, people retain content. I worked with a lady, she had every issue of Home and Garden on her computer. And I asked her why she did that. She goes, well, it's a lot easier to save it to my computer than to go out on the internet. Those are not records. Those are not company records. You need to be able to set your rules, set your changes, and get people to buy into what you're trying to accomplish. Federated search helps across repositories. Again, I'm really becoming more of a fan of managing in place because it's easier on the employees. But again, culturally, you need to work with your IT because they still may want to do a repository. Repositories are great. It's all in how you manage them and how you set them up. So the ultimate goal, remember that target, we want to provide clean data, clean information for future looking initiatives. Without clean data, without correct information, you may be making decisions based off of old information. So I encourage you to work with your IT folks, work with your legal folks, or whatever culturally within your organization you should be working with in order to be successful. And I know we probably have a lot of questions, David.
Yeah, no, you know what? We've got barely 10 minutes left here. We need to leave some time so folks can get to the next session here. We've got a question here about these automated systems that destroy information instead of doing it manually. What if the system deletes something that shouldn't be destroyed yet? What assurances do systems like this give that they're in fact accurate?
You know, that's a really easy answer. None. This is the problem. No matter what you do, when you're tagging or filtering or trying to figure out what content out there, you may run into situations where you tag something incorrectly. In my processes, we always validate decisions prior to deletion. So I mentioned I was able to filter over 500,000 files in less than 45 minutes. In this particular company, we have a process for validating that information by providing the code, providing the title, and then providing how many files we cleaned up. And then in the next tab, we provide the detail. Most people won't spend time to look at that. You will make mistakes, but it's better to make a mistake and hopefully catch it than not make a mistake and find out, oh my God, we just caught this because we didn't delete it and it should have been gone years ago. You will make mistakes and you need to market that. You need to communicate that. That's why you need folks to be involved with you. Does that answer the question, I hope?
Yeah, I think so. Honestly, the chat has been just lit up during the entire presentation. So I appreciate everyone's feedback that's in the chat. If I have missed you for some reason, I apologize, but I always love seeing all the input that's coming through, and it's always great to interact that way.
David, and I'm gonna also add, when I create ROT rules for low risk, medium risk, and high risk, I also create a quarantine process for content that might be iffy. So if we have a quarantine folder for something that's in high risk, we'll often create a 6-month quarantine where we make that content, take it out of view, but it's in a separate folder where they don't have access. So if all of a sudden our help desk is getting questions or wanting us to asking, hey, I lost this, can you get it back? We can do that. Most people, if they don't go look at something in 6 months, I don't know that they'll have to find it going forward. That's one way to help you with that process. The other thing is when you're doing your filters, make sure that you get good not statements. Not train, you know, if you're working on finance, for instance, accounts payable, you don't want not, you want to put in a not statement for training. You want to put a not statement in for calendars. You want to put in a not statement for content that has no place tied to an accounts payable record code. So I hope that answers that. Any other questions, David, that we?
No, just lots of great feedback. Lots of thanks to you. Everyone appreciates the insight that you're always able to bring along with these sessions here. I've made my email address available if anyone has some questions. I think you also have an email on the next slide if anyone wants to contact you directly. They were asking if the presentation will be available afterwards. I'm not exactly sure what ARMA has planned, but both David and I myself are more than happy to send this along in case anyone would like the presentation or answer any questions you might have.
David, I'll add, if you have questions we didn't answer, shoot us an email. We'll try to respond to it. Keep in mind, this is my experiences, both as a practitioner and as a consultant. I come at it with a different angle because I spent over 30 years as a practitioner. working in the trenches, trying to present programs to C-level folks. I've even presented in front of the board of directors to get buy-off on implementing a program for data cleanup and information management. You have to be wanting, you want to push that, but don't be afraid of it. And these are my thoughts. Your organization will have different thoughts. Understand what the need is of your organization. And remember, don't let perfect get in the way of practical.
I love that. So we just got clarification. Their the on-demand session will be available tomorrow on the platform itself. One question, if you can get to it, if you can do it quickly, because there is only like 5 minutes left. In your opinion, is SharePoint an effective system for managing RM and retention?
Wow. That's a loaded question. Quite honestly, I don't believe it to be. Although Microsoft has made leaps and bounds on, putting better processes in place and being able to create rules and tools for SharePoint. I know several organizations I've worked with that are moving away from SharePoint for right or for wrong or for whatever reason. I don't know what the cost of SharePoint is. I know it's expensive. I know a lot of folks are moving to Teams, but Teams is a, back-end SharePoint. I think once again, you got to get everybody into the room, into the sandbox to decide if SharePoint is how you want to move. It's a good tool, no question. But it's something that you need to work out with IT and your executives. That's pretty, now I sound like a politician.
Ever the diplomat. I do love that.
Not to be a politician. I don't like to bash any product. I think every product has its pluses and every product has its minuses. I firmly believe there's not a panacea out there for any product. No, and even Dave, Shiny Dot, Cognitive, Active Navigation, they all have their quirks. That's why you need IT in the room to look at them and see what best fits within your organization. Not to sell Cognitive. It's been a pretty cool tool to use. So is Active Nav. So again, it boils down to what you want to do, what your target is, and what the end goal is at the end of the day.
David, once again, thank you. I always appreciate when you are able to jump on these sessions. It's always fun to co-host with you. So hopefully we'll see a lot of you again next year, hopefully in person. I forget this virtual stuff. I want to see you all in person.
We'll be without all this stuff, David.
Right? Oh, your poor shoulder. My gosh. Everyone, thank you very much. I very much appreciate it. Both Dave and I do, for taking the time to attend the session here. And I hope you enjoy the rest of InfoCon.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Make it a great day, everybody.